starts off with a signal somewhere on the other side of the world. Comes to the local agents, and then when it comes to my telephone, it means action. And so I'm going to go to that house, and they're happy, looking forward perhaps to seeing him come home, and I'm going to break their hearts.
I heard a voice from heaven say...
It is as well that the church cares for Mrs. Roberts' broken heart, because the state does not care to find out why her son was lost at sea.
For they take with them...
The sea is a mighty thing, and there are a number of cases, such as in the case of the Marine. Those men shouldn't have died, and they died because of money. It's quite clear in that case, they died because of cutting costs.
When the woman loses her son, or her father, or her brother, the ship owner loses nothing. He's got that ship well insured. There's one thing about flags of convenience ships, they are well insured. They make a profit out of death.
They didn't even get their last wages. We were told that they'd been paid their wages on board the ship and that the wages went down with the ship. Now, isn't that convenient?
Tyneside has always sent her sons to sea, especially when times have been hard, and that's been often enough. Today, though, times are hard at sea as well. Shipping is in decline. You have to take what ship you can, even if it's flying a foreign flag with foreign standards of safety and manning. British regulations in the days when Britain ruled the mercantile waves protected the Tyneside sailors. Those days are long gone. Gone, too, is much of the responsibility Britain used to owe to her mariners and their safety at sea. Ship owners flag out or register their ships abroad to take advantage of laxer foreign taxes. Less legitimate are those who flag out rust-bucket boats just to exploit the slacker sea laws some flag states demand. At the dog end of a dwindling industry, cut-price crews and foreign flags form a lethal combination. The cargo vessel Marine was British-based, had a British crew, sailed from a British port, and flew the flag of the Bahamas.
Okay.
She was bound for Spain with a cargo of scrap. Even under Bahamas regulations, the Marine should have set sail with a complement of 7 qualified crew. There were just 6 aboard. Only 3 had any qualifications. The Marine had recruited the others in Tyneside, straight off the dole. They'd never been to sea before. Without a job since leaving school, Paul Wilson jumped at the chance.
He was very adventurous, like all sports, fishing, things like that. He was packed before his time, before he had to go. He was really excited. He was dancing about, you know. I mean, from leaving school, he had only been on schemes like YTSs and things like that.
Now this was a proper job?
It was a proper job, yeah.
How exactly did he get the job?
He had been down to the job centre and he had seen it advertised in the job centre. He wasn't successful at the interview, but a couple of days later he got a letter saying that a vacancy had arisen and was he still interested. And he made a telephone call and that was it.
Mark Roberts was the eldest of 6 children. He took the place of the father who'd long ago left home.
Being the eldest, he was, I suppose you could say, the breadwinner. He used to go with my brothers. He used to play snooker with them and he was more like their brother. I can still see him. The morning he went away in his bag and he was glad, you know, but he was only 16 I mean, the wages weren't fantastic, but to him they were a lot. And then to see a bit of the world, you know, he was going to all these different places. He was over the moon.
Doug Borthwick was at the end of his career. Old hands or youngsters, both desperate for work, are typical recruits.
And he was delighted when he got the job. He came straight away to tell me that he'd got this job. And it was quite unusual because he said the ship was owned by 2 British guys and they would be sailing as the master and the mate, and that it would be a chance to sail on a British ship after all these years because he'd had to sail foreign flag for so long.
In fact, she flew the flag of the Bahamas. For the boy sailors of the Marine, the voyage began promisingly enough.
He said that he had been seasick, but he liked the job and he had a nice cabin. But he was homesick. He'd never been away from home before, and he was dying to come home, but he couldn't get home until February. He said that he had got his wages and he had sent her £100 for the kids for Christmas. That was the last I heard from him, and they sailed that night. They never came back.
It was in December 1989 that the Marine loaded her cargo of scrap in Liverpool and set out for Spain on the midnight tide with her fledgling crew.
I thought he'd be supervised, you know, in the capacity as an apprentice engineer. And, I mean, looking down as they'd put it on paper, 9 of a crew, and he was surplus to the crew, you know, it looked all right to me.
Area forecasts for the next 24 hours. There are warnings of gales in all areas. Finisterre, southwest...
The Marine ploughed into foul weather. She was 3 days overdue before it was left to the families to raise the alarm. The Bay of Biscay in a storm is no place for unsupervised work experience.
We were told that they were to be receiving training on board, but they only had 1 engineer who would have been in the engine room all the time, 1 captain and 1 mate. Now, they would have had to sail the ship between them. I mean, 1 must have been sleeping while the other 1 was working, and they only had 3 untrained deckhands. So how on earth they were giving them any training? I don't know.
This is Portishead Radio, Merchant Vessel Marine, departed Liverpool 9th December, bound Seville, 6th.
No one sighted the foundering Marine. No wreckage was ever recovered. After 5 days, the search for survivors was abandoned.
The 3 young men who were working on the deck of that vessel had between them less than 3 or 4 months' experience. No experience to speak of. They were on their first ship. And in terms of the Bahamians' own rules, they shouldn't have been counted as part of the complement. So, from that point of view, the crew really only had 3 crew that could be counted as such.
It takes intense and arduous concentration to keep a lookout, steer and navigate. On well-run ships, 2 men work together on alternating 4-hour watches. On the Marine, there were only 2 men qualified to man the bridge 24 hours a day.
The indications are that for most of those 12 hours, they would be on the bridge by themselves. And obviously that would put terrible stresses, not least tiredness, upon the captain or the officer.
The Marine broke international regulations on crewing, but a Bahamas report into the disaster made no connection between the scandalous inexperience of her crew and the loss of the Marine.
It really started to come out that he was a gopher. He wasn't there as an apprentice at all. And he had already made up his mind He was due off just before the Christmas, and he said he was making it his last trip. He was fed up. They were taking people off the streets from up here and using them as cheap labour.
We had no information from the company. To be quite honest, we didn't know who the company were.
A formal letter from a mystery holding company didn't even give the families the address of their dead son's employers.
We were given a telephone number in Scotland to telephone, and it was an answering machine. And that had left a telephone number of a solicitor's in London.
So you've lost your son, and all you're left with is an answering machine message?
Yes. Yes. I've had a letter to say that they're missing, presumed dead. And that is it. Nothing else. No, there's no bodies found. Nothing. So really, you're expected to come to terms with that, you know, and you just can't. There's no way. I know I can't. Maybe through time you might learn to live with it. But it's certainly hard to accept.
For the merciful goodness of the Lord endureth forever and ever towards those who fear him.
Added to the sorrow of the mothers of the Marine, there's the terrible fear that with no lessons learnt, their sons have died in vain.
In his fullness, presence of the fullness of joy.
We're meant to be a maritime nation, but only high drama arouses public concern for those who risk their lives at sea. On a winter night 8 years before the Marine went down, engines failed on the Union Star and it drifted helpless onto the rocks. The Penly lifeboat was called out. All the crew of the lifeboat died. The nation demanded an inquiry. The government granted one at once. There was genuine and official grief. In that same Cornish storm, few remember 6 other lives that were lost. The crew of the cargo vessel Mark. The crew were British, but the Mark sailed under a flag of convenience. Leonard Martin was one of those who drowned. He'd been a year out of work, so decided to take a risk on a foreign-flagged ship. Again, like the Marine, the loss of the little Mark was barely noticed.
It was a one-day wonder, really, in the paper, and then it was forgotten. A life had been lost and nobody cared. Very soon after it had happened, the realisation came that nobody was interested. We'd gone through all the channels and we got all the short answers that we were ever going to get.
The Mark was registered in Panama, the country with one of the world's worst maritime records. She was barely seaworthy, according to the pilot who took her out to sea.
Yes, I still believe that that was the worst condition of any ship that I had been on board during my career. The strap across the top of the hatch was in very poor condition. If that strap breaks, of course, the canvas covering the hatchboards can be ripped off by the wind or sea. When the hatchboards are not then locked into place, any sea can come over and fill up the ship, and she will sink like a stone.
This is the London headquarters of Panama's Registry of Shipping. If 6 lives had been lost on a British-flagged vessel, there would have been an immediate and exhaustive inquiry by the Department of Trade and Industry. But the Mark's flag made her, conveniently, Panama's business. The eventual report ran to just 3 pages. No questions were asked, no evidence was gathered, no mention was made of the state of the vessel. The report simply recorded the loss. And the families already knew about that.
It sailed from a British port. It sailed with British lives. Somebody's accountable, or at least there should have been an inquiry held to find out exactly what happened, so that we can all rest a bit easier.
The law gives government the power to inquire further into the loss of British lives on foreign-flagged ships, but it doesn't often choose to use it. Leonard Martin's widow got no compensation for the loss of her husband. The shipowner had insured the vessel for £100,000.
The Spanish Navy towed the Belgrave to port in Vigo late last night. Robert Kirkup, the man who survived the accident, helped bring the vessel in. It's believed the poisonous fumes were created by poorly ventilated scrap metal.
2 years ago, the Bahama-flagged Belgrave became a ghost ship. But no British inquiry has ever bothered to ask the ship's sole survivor how 4 of his shipmates died. The ship's cook was left to steer her single-handed.
I was on the bridge, well, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and that's the earliest I could leave the bridge. So I went down the hole. And then when I got to the bottom of the ladder, there's the 4 men there. The 2 men, the 2 deckhands was at the bottom of the ladder, face down. The captain was laid on top of them, and the chief engineer was sprawled out on his back to one side. And I had to pull the captain over like that, and he come over in one. So I thought, there's nothing more I can do here now, they're all dead. And by the time I got to the top of the hatch again, and onto the folks' lead, I was gasping for breath myself.
Philip Quinn had never been to sea before, untrained on a ship which by British standards was already undermanned.
Philip was 20 years. Since he had left school, he'd been unemployed for a long time. And the job came along at sea. It was a great excitement going away to sea, different countries. At the time, I guess I was a bit envious, because it seemed he had a better job than me, after being unemployed for so long. Because he was travelling, he was seeing places which I possibly wouldn't.
What sort of places did he get to see?
Well, he went to Portugal, Spain, down the south coast, all in a very short time.
The Belgrave's cargo, metal swarf, absorbs oxygen. Below decks, the atmosphere is suffocating.
I knew that there was dangerous. I'd carried the cargo 2 or 3 times, but always full. The ship was always, you know, the hold was always full. And you've no need to go down the hold. Well, you couldn't get down the hold anyway. And all you do is just get there and open your hatches, and then they start discharging it, and that's it.
The safety regulations which warned about the dangers of metal swarf were found in the captain's cabin. They should have been pinned up. But the Belgrave wouldn't have been the first flag of convenience ship to cut corners on the safety of her crew.
The captain just sung out over the mic, right, I want you to go down the owl now and check them cranes, check all the lashings on them, see they're okay. Philip went down first. He'd just gone forward and opened the bulby hatch, lifted it up and never thought no more, just gone down.
Untrained and unwarned, Philip Quinn was totally innocent of the lethal danger he was walking into.
It really does come across as a mystery how a number of men can follow each other to their own death. Why did they all follow each other? Were they trained? Were they knowledgeable about what was happening? There's not enough crew to put you under close supervision and tell you basically step by step what to do. And unless you've had a good training, I feel it's a very difficult and dangerous job.
With no satisfactory investigation by the Bahamas, a British inquest could only record the bleak and minimal facts of death.
I was very sad when thinking about young Philip Quinn, who had been unemployed for so long and got his first job and went off to sea full of hope and without any training. something wrong there.
Again, the British government could have investigated. But in a political atmosphere of deregulation, the government rations its inquiries mainly to those British flag cases the law demands.
Under the Merchant Shipping Act, there is a procedure where a UK flagged ship, where a death occurs on or about such a ship, then there is a very full inquiry is held and there is a report is sent to the Secretary of State. But, of course, where the ship is not a UK-registered ship, then there's no such investigation takes place, inquiry, report or anything.
So why Philip Quinn died will never be known. Britain doesn't seem to want to know, in spite of a survivor to tell the tale. The flag of Malta flies over the merchant vessel Pollyanna. The Pollyanna is different. She's still afloat. A seaborne scandal. This winter, a worried Pollyanna crewman actually reported her to the Department of Transport. Fearing the blacklist, he wants his identity concealed.
Two young lads, it was their first trip at sea. They'd never been to sea in their lives, had no formal qualifications, wouldn't even know how to launch a life raft or a lifeboat or any safety aspects whatsoever.
Were they being trained at all?
No, they were just there to do a duty the best way they could or how they could, just to make the numbers up.
So how would you generally sum up the state of crewmanship on that vessel?
Appalling, totally appalling. If it had been a British ship, it would not have been allowed. The vessel itself was 27 years old. It's taken a hammer in from the sea. It's had very low maintenance done on it. The engine room itself was a disaster area. The ship actually had a list of about 25 degrees to starboard.
25, that's about that much, isn't it?
Yes. It can more or less tipping over, you could say. If you were in a strong enough storm, you could push yourself over. Plus, it had a cargo of scrap, which is a heavy cargo to carry. When I joined the vessel in Birkenhead, they actually had divers down trying to find holes in the double bottoms.
Holes in the actual hull?
In the hull, yes, into the double bottoms. So, in a sense, if you were pumping out ballast, the double bottoms would keep refilling. You would have to keep the ballast pumps going for 24 hours a day, and you just couldn't do that.
How safe was that ship?
Very unsafe. It was frightening that we could have gone down to Greece, and at any time between Plymouth and Greece, we could have just disappeared.
Britain has a formal duty to act when such urgent and desperate warnings are made. But because the warning wasn't put in writing, the Pollyanna was allowed to sail away.
I never heard from the Department of Transport until 10 o'clock in the evening, and they said the official in Plymouth could not stop the ship because of a clause called force majeure.
This is the inspector whose job it is to inspect ships like this.
That's correct.
And they were invoking this force majeure clause, which says that they can't inspect a ship if it's outside territorial waters.
Yes, that's correct. It was an anchor in Plymouth, inside the breakwaters. So it basically was still inside British territorial waters, plus it had come from a British port. It discharged a cargo in Birkenhead.
So you think it should have been able to be inspected?
Oh, without a doubt. It was just total negligence by the Department of Transport.
It was left to Gibraltar to act where Britain had failed and have the ship detained. If lives had been lost, it would have been in part because Britain turns a blind eye to the safety of her men in foreign ships. And it has shut both eyes to the fate of the Marine. Britain has the legal right to investigate if any British interest is involved. 6 British lives might be thought to represent such an interest. But when Parliament debated the Marine, interest was not high.
But one can't help thinking that the Bahamas inquiry would be more restricted than the inquiry that should be held. Can he take that point on board?
If the Chief Inspector of Marine Accidents is of the opinion that the inquiry was any less thorough than an investigation its own inspectors would have carried out under the same circumstances, then an investigation by his branch will be given due consideration. And I make that point, and I hope that everybody will appreciate that we would like to see, obviously, what the Bahamian authorities say, and then judge what kind of...
The Bahamas, they haven't got the people, haven't got the qualified and competent people to hold an inquiry. At least Britain has. We have enough experts in the government departments to form an inquiry into the loss. But Bahamas, no. Panama, no.
In January, the government finally pronounced itself satisfied with the Bahamian report. There's now no hope of holding anyone to account for those lives that were squandered at sea.
They said that it would be done by the Bahamian government because the ship was flagged out by them. I don't think the British government want to take this on board. I don't think they want to know what has happened. They just want us to go away. They're not worried about people like us. We're just petty working class people who are very dispensable. They aren't worried about us. They just want to get on with what they're doing. They want to get on, the ship owners want to get on with making money, because by running these ships with small crews on a shoestring, they can't lose because they're making a lot of money because they're running things on the cheap.
Yeah, I blame these flags of convenience, the undermanning, undertraining, in every aspect of sort of using a loophole in the English law to get away with sort of taking these young lads. It's got to be stopped. It'll not bring my son back, but it might stop somebody else's son being put in the same situation. They're just getting away with pure murder, really.
The government keeps no figures on Britain's loss on foreign-flagged ships. Mark Roberts isn't even a statistic.
To you, what was he?
Oh, well. He was my best friend, I suppose.
As well as your eldest son?
Yeah.
Special person?
Mm. Everybody liked him. Everybody.
The death rate at sea is the same as it used to be down the coal mines, as Tyneside has reason to know. There were always inquiries after a pit disaster. But when foreign-flagged ships go down, the reasons, like the men, are lost at sea.
The only wish I have is that he's either been asleep or didn't know, because he would have been terrified. And that's the only comfort I get.
That he may have been asleep?
Yeah. He didn't know.
I hope he was.
So do I.